Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Ben Stewart podcast. This is the 2022 winter solstice episode, and I can't think of anyone better than the beautiful, wise Laurel Airica on the show for today. She offers a mind-bending, paradigm-shifting reintroduction to the English language that brings to light the hidden philosophy of puns, anagrams, and the symbols of the alphabet. What she discovered through a lifetime of letter and word play ultimately led her to create Word Magic Global, wordplay that unravels mass hypnosis and elevates the frequency of consciousness. I have been talking about stuff like this for quite some time, but it's so beautiful to find somebody who is actually living it, embodying it, and bringing it to the people in an art form that I haven't seen anybody else really do with this kind of justice. So with that being said, please let's welcome Laurel Airica on the Ben Stewart podcast. And here we are, Laurel. Thank you so much for sharing this winter solstice with us.
What an honor and a delight. Thank you, Ben.
It's been great chatting with you the past few times that we've had a chance to chat. I have to say that I saw you first on Aubrey Marcus's podcast, and I have been in love with what you've been saying since then. But it was Pete Evans at the Evolve Network and his podcast who reached out to me and said, Ben, you really have to connect with Laurel. I'm not sure what this even means or for what purpose, but maybe there's something that can happen here. And so then I listened to the podcast that you did with Pete. And I just listened to it. I just had it in my ears and I was laying there, closed my eyes, and it really impacted me deeply. So whereas most times, even myself, who am fascinated by this topic, I still sometimes lose the profundity of words, the power of words as they come out of our mouth, the way that we use them, the intention behind them, and the power of those words landing on other people and how that moves inside them. And it's odd because I've been talking about this for quite some time, and it still very much so resonated when I heard you speaking about it on Pete Evans' podcast, that I really knew that I needed to connect with you and I needed to share what you're doing with my audience and with the world some way. And so I guess the very first question is, I want to know from, it maybe doesn't need to be the beginning of the story, but when was it that you started realizing that like words and wordplay and that the language that we use has so much power, force, and effect? And when did you start playing with
it? I'll answer that in just a moment. But what you said in terms of the power of the word, Greg Braden has marvelous stuff on Gaia, language, and the matrix. And it provides the science behind what I've been sharing for decades. It comes to the recognition that language is software, and English is the leading software of the Western mind, and it is filled with cultural biases akin to computer viruses, and not just human-made, but those that pre-exist in the sounds of words and in the symbols that compose them. That's why playing with words leads to entertaining ideas. I could almost say everything I've ever needed to know, I've learned from my ABCs. And yet there are people who delved into them much more fully, far more fully than I am. I am not an academic linguist. Anyway, I'm going to step back to what my original interruption was before I respond to your question. And that is the statement about the power of the words. I don't know where I found this quote. The attribution is to unknown rather than to a particular person. And it says, according to quantum physics, a particle vibrating due to your sound when you speak can affect a molecule inside a star at the edge of the universe instantly. This phenomenon is known as quantum entanglement. Isn't that? And I just have been listening to a couple of Greg Braden podcasts.
Yeah.
So excellent, so fascinating, so informative. The idea that we live in a matrix. And I have a poem called "Is the Word a Matrix Made Out of Word Tricks?" And that's on YouTube.
I love Greg Braden. I'm sorry, were you about to launch into that poem? I just want to make sure I don't.
No, I was, thank you
Okay.
for asking. No, but in looking for that quote, I have shrunk Skype to a postage stamp. And I'm wondering what symbol on it enlarges it. I see a little arrow pointing upward in a square.
Are
Shall
you
I
on
give
a
it a
are you
try?
on a Mac or on Windows?
Mac.
Yeah. I would just hit that. I
Yeah.
believe it.
Okay, Skype would like to record the computer's screen. Do I say yes? I
You
guess.
don't have to. We're already recording on our end.
And
You're
now
good.
it says choose screen to share. I guess I don't want to. Okay, thank you so much.
You're good.
Speaking
So,
of software,
right.
it is very interesting. That was something that you mentioned that in that Pete Evans podcast, was that language is a software that not only can be but really needs to be updated. And I want to hear from you on this, like what is in your experience, in your wisdom, what is the way that we update this language? And just for a quick caveat, so my wife is Dutch. That language is older than English, and I hear often colloquially that English is a mutt language, that it really is just a mixed bag of different things. It doesn't follow hard, rigid rules like Dutch does. And I hear that as being almost the attitude of it is that this is a very lowbrow language. And so I would love to know your thoughts on the English language as a software and how it is that we might actually play with it to update and what updating the software is actually doing.
Well, I will share that with you in just a moment. I want to go back to your beginning question. How did I start doing what I'm doing? And I started at the age of about 3 or 4 years old. And there's a whole story around it. But I also said too about what initiated me. And just like Alice in Wonderland was in pursuit of a white rabbit, it was a bat that I was in pursuit of that started my developing the capacity to use echolocution, as a friend of mine accidentally described it, using the sounds of words, since we're living in a hall of mirrors and echo chamber. So I used the sounds of words to become of sound mind myself, because I went through a massive gaslighting experience growing up, just because people were so ignorant in that generation in particular, and hostile, because no one wants to feel like they're missing. Anyway, don't need to go there. I started and I said to my parents when I was 3 or 4, I bet I now know all the words in the English language. And my mother said, I bet you don't, and spoke a word I'd never heard before. And I said, well, what language was that? And I had a confirmation of this coming in to this incarnation with a lot of work behind me on this subject, done with very high intention, recognizing the power of the word. So I just, before we got together for this call, I was listening to Greg Braden on I think it's Missing Links, but talking about the fact that the probability that we're living in a computer simulation. And just about the last sentence he spoke in that episode, he said, "We need a new way to look at our world and a new language to solve our problems." So English is, as I see it, a mongrel language. We know that language is manipulated all the time to persuade people of whatever perspective people are, those in charge are trying to get their agreement for. So funny, because agreement is not only a compliance, but when the light of our consciousness moves through the lens of our perception, which is shaped through our words, then we are adding mental energy to an image of reality that is essentially a mythology and not the fulfillment of our actual potentiality as a culture. So I started this work, a continuation of past lives, surely, and just playing with words and finding little fascinating things. Like, I think the first one I noticed was my father, who was an artist, would also make the frames for his paintings, and he had a little level. And I was fascinated by the bubble in the center of it and how it measured what level was. And then I was fascinated by the word level itself, because it is a level word. It's LE and then a fulcrum EL. And so my goodness, I was often running very early, doing things that were considered foolish, playing with words, well, puns, which are words that have the same sound and different meaning, also known as homonyms. It was said, a popular wisdom is that puns are the lowest form of humor. And that's hundreds of years old, even though the greatest punsters in English were Shakespeare and James Joyce. There may be others, but these are the ones I'm familiar with. And James Joyce said something like, "Some of my puns are trivial, but others are quadrivial," meaning layers of meaning. So in 2010, I did a YouTube, my first, I believe, sharing what I call the secret spells of the English language. In the 90s, I had put together this sentence that I call our premier life sentence. So it's actually preceded by the life sentence children enter. But as an adult, which you notice is an idiot if you spell it ADOLT, or a grown up, which sounds like you're in pain and complaining about it. So I had put together this life sentence, which goes essentially, "We awake each morning and go off during the weekdays to earn our living at various jobs and undertakings until we come to the weekend." And I explained that what I do is a translation of the English language. And I spell that TRANCE, with the idea that words cast spells. They put us into a trance, which may be why we're so fascinated by zombies, because they are a reflection of how most of us move through life. So when you translate that life sentence, you realize that awake is a funeral party celebrating the dead. Mourning is the state of grief you're experiencing when you attend awake. when the alarm clock wakes you up, to get back on the wheel, back on the daily grind. So so we awake. Oh, so when we say to each other, "Good morning," the subconscious is also hearing "good grief." I am quite certain, could be wrong, but doesn't matter. So going off through the weekdays. There's the days of the week. That is a description of dazed, weak zombies. So we go through the days of the week to earn our living. Urns are vases for the ashes of the dead. We call our jobs undertakings, which is what we undertake as we race to meet deadlines rather than lifelines. Job itself is a Hebrew word for persecuted, Job. And what we get at the end of this perverse bargain with life is progressively weakened. And so we pronounce a 10-year period, a decade. Some Brits pronounce it a decade, which is kind of what happens to our consciousness. There's a decay that when you just have to shut down because you are only minimally invited to participate as your true self on this plane of existence, unless you throw off the shackles of that conditioning, and methods for doing so are proliferating. One I'm just on the beginning of my voyage with is called internal family systems. So we all, many of us, have a quiet riot going on in our heads, especially when we're triggered. And with that life sentence, our most frequent greeting to each other is hello. And if you reverse the syllables, it becomes oh hell. So I once asked a group of people, what shall we do about that fact that hello in reverse is oh hell? And given that life sentence, isn't that a natural exclamation? So a woman who was or is maybe still a midwife, she said, how about hallow? So, which means to make sacred, to honor as sacred. So namaste, the Sanskrit greeting that expresses that I recognize the divine essence that is you, that is your true self. And the other person reflects that back, because we need to be deeply seen to be truly present in the world. When we come in, an upgrade from the prior generation, it might be very threatening to them. Just like professors in universities don't want the most updated scientific information because it means that everything they've taught before was wrong. And Greg Braden pointed out it means that it was a prelude, and your open-minded exploration allows you to bring in what is next. So we need a what is next with the English language. Many people believe this was done to us by a foreign power outside the planet. May be absolutely true, but not entirely. I believe that there is what I call an electropoetic force that causes words to migrate across centuries, cultures, and one other little element to come into the same vibration, something magnetic. And maybe part of what it is the compulsion, the essential nature of marrying a falsehood with enough truth to serve as its battery for its longevity in the culture. So if you look at the word a lie, you see it is not fully alive. So that V, that closing the space between those two little words, and adding a V before the E is like the arrow tip of whatever, energetic, divine intention or whatever, a vitalizing force. So when you have a falsehood that you're trying to sustain in the real, in reality, and notice that it's REAL when it's authentic and REEL when it's a simulation of a simulation. I mean, it's layers and layers. So, okay, I could find what train of, that's a very antiquated metaphor, why I was going there. Give me a moment, please. So I don't believe that the language is being manipulated constantly. And Socrates said, incorrect language is not only in itself a mistake, it implants evil in men's souls. And the Athenian general Thucydides, who was an historian and wrote about the war between Athens and Sparta, said that the greatest casualty and horror of all that was the corruption of the language. And then he writes about the repercussion, which is the corruption of the whole moral fiber of the consciousness and the individuals who carry it. Words are fundamental. And I emphasize that because you don't have to be all that educated or even smart to play with them and let them inform you. So what I realized is that there are words that have come together magnetically. And in one of my large unfinished works it's called The Rites of Passion of Philomela Nightingale, a fairy's tale. And it is, okay, now I know why I'm there. It is about an elemental being who goes through the looking glass into this dimension and has to deconstruct the language to find her way back home again. And here's, I'll do like a little bit of page 3. She says, it was only in my dreams that I could totally relax, for then I'd join my real family on the wrong side of the tracks on which old trains of thought convey ideas that steal our minds away by heading off in one direction, at the same time doubling back. I will give you some examples that are favorite ones of mine. The fact that praying sounds so savage, yet it also sounds divine. Or how about the way the prophet has become our bottom line? Could there be a briefer history, a briefer summary of millennia of history than these pray and prophet metaphors used to justify so-called holy wars? Now add worship or worship, parish or perish, and you'll soon understand why our world's so nightmarish. And when I use the word nightmare, I like to share that the word or the phrase, the live stream, the live stream, and the live stream, whose ear is discerning enough to detect a difference? I believe the lack of a difference is because of the lack of a difference. I believe we're creating this constantly, and we can, through our words, primarily, through which work on our belief systems. So having words like pray and prophet and all of those that they do not necessarily come from the same roots. But while etymologies have been the primary way people play with words, the word histories, there is an unfounded assumption that we are getting the accurate history, and we're not. We're getting people's conjecture, and some of it may be accurate and some not. What I do, I call linguistic synchronicities. I have my ears tuned to words that share the same sound. So they have the same name. And I look at it and I wonder how they might reflect on each other and how they might impact us on a subconscious level. So with the secret spells of the English language, which I posted in 2010. And excuse me.
Can I ask, while you're doing that, and I don't want to derail the train of thought that you were on, but the trivium and the quadrivium, the 7 liberal arts, I'm curious if you're familiar with them, and if
only the terms, and I've had education envy. Wouldn't I have loved, and wouldn't so many of us, to be so deeply and richly educated? So that's about the most I can say of it. I think there are private schools that are endeavoring to provide it. I don't know much about it.
Yeah, it's just interesting because you said early on something about the mythos or the mythology, and what would something like that be other than a collection of words organized in a specific way, with a kind of an infrastructure to it. And the trivium is grammar, logic, and rhetoric. It's like it's the first 3 of the 7 liberal arts, which is basically learning grammar is understanding the building blocks, and then logic is stringing them together, and then rhetoric, you could even say that's wisdom, wisdom, or better understanding of when you string these words together and you deliver them with an idea attached to them, some kind of energy imprint attached to them, that it does have an effect on the listener. And this is why we hear about propaganda, right? And propaganda, what is it other than art with a deceptive intention? Propaganda is trying to sell you something without showing you it's trying to sell you something underneath the guise of it. Whereas art, on the face of it, it seems less deceptive. It's more, coming from a different intention. So I was just curious if you'd seen that, because I definitely think you're right. There's something about our language, and I wanted to kind of ask about English, like, if English is this kind of a mutt, and a lot of these words that you're bringing up, they are the English words, what makes English not a throwaway language, but actually like a language that we should work with more? Because I do have, like I said earlier, there are a lot of people that are like, English is the bastardization of original languages. And I never knew whether I actually believed that or not. I definitely see that many in English, and we both know Jason Pickard, and I was just interviewing him based upon some words that come from Sanskrit. And so the interesting thing is, a lot of words that we use in the English language, some come from Dutch, some come from French, some come from Sanskrit, some come from Greek or Latin. And it's kind of this hodgepodge. I would love to know the power in that. And because I already sense it. I'm sensing the resonance in you playing with the words and calling attention to, especially when you're talking about death and, like mourning and, what was it? Like, there were a few others of those. And then I was thinking like, well, I used to study Black's Law Dictionary, which is a further deviation. It's English words that almost sound like, if you're listening to it, when you're hearing about a person, you're like, oh, well, that's got to mean a human, flesh and blood, when in fact it's not. It's a legal fiction. And mortgage, where the word mortgage comes from, and where actually a 30-year mortgage originated, was early in the 1900s, understanding that most people, when they would get a mortgage, life expectancy only gave them roughly 30 more years to live, right? So that's how long the mortgage was. And I could go even further down that, like an army corps, like a corporation, corpse. A lot of these words are kind of plugged in there. And I was always wondering, wow, there must have been some really, really, really intelligent people if there's some kind of, whatever, like, elite or elusive group manufacturing this with their own human intellects, manufacturing this, which is why I like what you said, that there seems to be an electro poetic, did you call it?
That's what I call it.
Yeah, force behind the scenes that's kind of organizing it in this way. So let me condense this all back down to a question. Um, the English language being updated, is this where slang just takes over? And it more like grassroots, we just take the words back and we imbue them with new meaning. What do you see it as?
Well, you don't know. Sorry about adding that little phrase. Thomas Jefferson said, new times require new words, and I guess, assigning of new meaning to old words. So here's how I see it. Well, let me just preface it by saying I read in a book years ago by the grandson of Charles Berlitz, also that name, who founded the Berlitz language schools. He said that there was a gamble, a bet made over cups at the pub in Ireland, where someone said he could get a new word into circulation in 24 hours. And that was the bet, and he won it. And all this graffiti was appearing on the walls in the area, and the word was quiz. And that occurred hundreds of years ago. So obviously, we can make a big difference quickly. And what occurred to me years ago is to create a literary lotto where people are invited to listen to the still small voice in response to the question we ask, upwardly or inwardly, give me a new word, and or something like that. It was when I did that, walking in a beautiful park, that I heard the meaning, the true, I don't even like to use definition or meaning, I need to create something else, for beautiful, which is to be you to full, but not you imitating somebody else, which is what so many people do. There's a contagion of looks, and I have even a piece on it. So I don't, so it's creating a literary lotto where people are inspired to come up with new words, metaphors, and phrases that can convey a higher frequency in our communications and inspire a higher frequency of consciousness in our communications and a greater frequency of kindness in our interactions, so that we can make the essential evolutionary leap that we are called upon to make at this time, is to go from humankind to human kindness. And really embody that, not as a member of the human race, which is already so aggressive and competitive, though that wasn't the origin of the word, which I think razzo or something in Italian. So we go from a member of the human race to a being of humane grace. And this is the time where we can awaken to and embody our sacred human majesty. And as I have said in the past, if you want to see what nobility, what true nobility looks like, go to the forest and see those tall trees providing so much for so many for sometimes centuries, and become as true as trees. For true nobility speaks itself. To be noble, there must be noble. Otherwise, your integrity crumbles inside of you. And once that occurs, it is a strenuous undertaking to regain trust from other people.
I think the infrastructure for what we're talking about as far as an upgrade in the human language is, interestingly, it is abounded within the past couple decades. Social media, giving a voice to those, even in the face of censorship. Like, let's say you censored a million more people from where we are today, there's still far more of an infrastructure for getting your voice out there than there were in the previous decades. And I look at these, where some people might get caught up in thinking, well, that's just a coincidence. It's just like, and it's a synchronicity, and it just so happens to be an excellent platform by which, more so than just those with either the social privilege or the gift of gab that got into media years back, nowadays everybody who has the ability to form words and ideas, thoughts and concepts, imbue them with emotion and get them out there, and then also be, let's say, inspired by those that they're seeing through this infrastructure as well, and in more real time augmenting their own language. I think there's something that this is very timely, what you're mentioning.
Well, thank you. And in terms of coincidence, as I like to point out, it is a deceptive word, because it says there's been a coincidence, but it also implies there's no significance to it.
Right.
So we dismiss it as a coincidence without ever looking more closely at, well, what's behind that coincidence? What propelled those two anomalous things or beings or events, whatever, to happen simultaneously? What's behind it? What's going on? So in terms of the censorship, but still there are avenues for connecting. So I like the analogy I've heard people use about when a caterpillar, he's been through meltdown, and the new being, the new life form, is coming into being with what is termed imaginal cells. They have the image, I guess, of the different life form as this little creature goes from terrestrial to celestial, which is what time it is in our lives also, to embody the infinite in finite form. So when the first imaginal cells pop up, the immune system of that little sack of goo attacks it. So those of us who are here with a new perspective to offer have, many of us, had a lot of negative energy and words directed toward us. But as more and more people awaken to who they are and to why they're here, what they came to do, we will, I believe, overpower the forces that are seeking to devolve the planet. somewhere in one of my writings, I say we are poised on the precipice of making the leap into higher consciousness or an ant heap. And there are many who are feeling that impulse that the caterpillar feels, that the acorn feels when the true natural being is bursting through the restrictions, so that there can be a full flowering of that being's infinite intention and incarnation ability. The infinite describes itself as infinite. That's where you look for it. If you're breathing, you have the potential to reconnect with your divine genius. So this this literary lotto is not going to be helter-skelter. It's very high intention, and the high bar we set for what people are invited to send in, with maybe like a lotto, maybe it's $5, maybe it's $20, to share what came to you in a sudden moment of awareness. That's called an epiphany. And I describe an epiphany as a sudden recognition of the obvious. Everything is obvious. What I show, like, okay, I don't want to call them trains of thought. It's such a ridiculous mode of conveyance. So Braden and God Eternal, and okay, and then the lotto. I have to diagram it. So, well, that helps me. So at the Literary Lotto, people will be invited to open and download new words, symbols, metaphors, and phrases that can inspire the best instead of the beast in us all. And they will have a place to send it in. We will have a team that reviews them. And this is not worked out, so I'm just proposing that perhaps once a month there is a winner with a word that is scintillating. And I am not the only one calling forth an evolution of the language. I found that Confucius said it would be the first thing he would do would be to correct language if he was in charge. And Orwell said, politics corrupts language and language has corrupting real world influence, but we can start making changes at the verbal end. Gary Zukav has said it. Lynn McTaggart is now talking about it. Greg Braden talks about it. And perhaps my favorite statement was Terence McKenna in a YouTube, I think called DMT is Everything, where he says, I believe the forced evolution of language is how we're going to work our way back into taking care of the planet. So somehow that turned out to be what I'm here to perhaps initiate and help implement. It will require a team. So a description of it I posted also in 2010. I posted the secret spells of the English language, and I posted taking command of the English language. And it uses as an example the phrase something like commit random acts of kindness and acts of senseless beauty. And that one phrase had such an impact on people's behavior all around the world. And it continues to this day. And when I looked it up on Google, it appears that a woman sitting in a coffee shop in Sausalito wrote it on a napkin. So that might be an urban legend. But the fact is, it was an instant download and she shared it. This is going to be a place, the Word Magic Literary Lotto will be a place where you can share it, have what you are suggesting, reviewed, and we will honor the prophet who brings it forth and profit the prophet with whatever we make of it, if we do t-shirts or coffee mugs or whatever. This is about, what would be the word using, about proliferating inspiring words, phrases, messages, so that people are seeing it everywhere. And they're invited to let go of the trash talking, because you may have to eat your words at some point. And they say hello, not necessarily, but hold that sense that everyone we encounter is the infinite in finite form. That person may be in a deeper state of amnesia than you happen to be, or I am amnesia. um, but still, nonetheless, this person has divinity within them, and you're seeing them smiling, validating, helps them reconnect with who they are. So people, just to finish the little riff on the Literary Lotto, people will have an opportunity to send something in. We will find ways to market it, to honor people. And in this way, I mean, you spoke earlier of the intense education of medieval youth that we got so shortchanged on. And I grew up feeling my self-esteem was like zero. And I certainly did not know I was intelligent. And it took years, years to know that I am. And all of us are. Like Buckminster Fuller, one of the 20th century's greatest geniuses, said, everyone is born a genius, but some grow up less damaged than others. And I think he also said being a genius is simply having a good mother. So I look at genius as not a capacity some have and others don't. I look at it as our capacity to download divinely. It's in the field. Infinite intelligence is in the field, and we're held together by it. And so an opportunity to download words and phrases, to possibly be recognized them for them, to continually develop the muscle of inner listening, and to, in this way, word by word, phrase by phrase, remember who we truly are, and not these degraded beings that the movies portray and that the mainstream seems to seek to inflame and reinforce.
Mm. You know what I really like about this is I am a movement enthusiast, and I've been really fascinated by our connective tissue. Anatomists for the longest time have missed out on what the connective tissue is, because inside of a cadaver, it's brown, it's not translucent, it doesn't share light. But Dr. Jean-Claude Gimberto, in a film called Strolling Under the Skin, he was the first to put a microscope under the skin of living tissue to show that inside your body, your connective tissue is a liquid crystalline matrix. Not Jean-Claude Van Damme, Gimberto. It's Giumber, yeah, T-O. And you could just type in strolling under the skin, and you'll see that inside the body is a liquid crystalline matrix of fiber optic material that connects all systems with other systems within the body. It, and not the bone structure, is what's responsible for the exquisite shape of your body, your posture, how it's held. The relaxation of it is also helped by breath and mind. And I won't nerd out on it right now, but the interesting thing when we're talking about words is the very building blocks of what we're talking about. When you hear a word in your head, or when you say a word out loud, these are myofascial manipulations using air passed through the larynx and through the vocal cords to form vowels and syllables that, beat the air with a frequency that arrives at the listener and strikes you in such a way that it can have these amazing effects. You use the right words and you can cause Pharaoh's heart to soften. You use the wrong words and Pharaoh's heart can harden. And it's interesting that these are myofascial manipulations. So that's the first thing I want to say, is that the use of these words is you are creating vibratory sounds and sequences, and that's in its most rudimentary sense right there. And I've always found that interesting because, as Terence McKenna, as Confucius, as many people, and you yourself are intuiting that that the evolution of language will and can be the way that we unravel ourselves from this mass hypnosis, as I shared that you mentioned in your biography. But this mass hypnosis is also shared by our listening power, and I kind of want to talk about the way we receive when people are speaking, the way we hear things. As you were saying some of these words and saying, comparing it with death, I was then thinking of the word sacred and how similar it is to the word scared if you just rearrange the letters. But if you were to actually go in reverse order and say that the word scared rearranged is actually sacred. And so just the directionality of it kind of changes the impact of the listener as well. And I was curious your thoughts on not just taking command of the language, but also taking command of our capacity to listen. I wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Be compelling. And speak well, speak intelligently, honor the language. These are living vibrations. They are elemental NRGs. And so there's a gorgeous word, a Japanese word, kotodama, and it means, I understand, word spirit. And there's a quote in there on my website, laurelairica.com, which is the editing that I sometimes do for other people. The word kotodama, word spirit, the quote says about taking care of the place where you give a word to live in a sentence. So to me, that is so exquisite because it's creating music for the mind and the heart as I speak and write. That's the intention. And it thrills my heart. So for my master's degree in spiritual psychology, I accomplished what I had never been able to do before that, which was to create a book of philosophy through wordplay. And it's called We Do Come With Instructions. And it's true, and it's the ABCs of self-realization. What I realized was so amazing to me when I listened to another Greg Braden YouTube from the same series, where he talks about the DNA, God eternal within the body, that it's right there built into the cell. And what I show is the instruction manual is the English language itself. And when you look at it, because they're not just what I call secret spells, there are also what I call sacred pathwords. Beautiful is a sacred pathword. It tells you the intention to hold, to be your most authentic self. And we should be taping this. We're not.
We are.
Oh, no, we're still recording. You're good. I'll just edit it in post. Yeah.
Okay, great. So once, while I was writing that book, We Do Come With Instructions, I was looking at the word eccentric because it doesn't feel so good. It didn't to me to be considered eccentric. And I wondered as I was looking at it, what is the ek we're supposed to be centered around? And shortly after, because this is how our, whatever you want to call them, guides and angels work with us, I was reading a magazine article and it had the word echt in it, ECHT, and it is a German word and it means real, authentic, actual. So we're not supposed to be eccentric, which is kind of like ick-centric. We're meant to be ect-centric, centered on what is most true and real about ourselves, which is a gift that keeps unfolding with our exploration and healing work.
I know that word. My wife is Dutch, and that word is the same in Dutch. And yeah, I often think of these words and the sounds that they elicit. But I really want to get back to that poem.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Here it goes. Always one digression after another. Where did I get ipsissima verba? I came across it in an enormous dictionary. It's not that I know Latin, but there are some Latin phrases that pop up that are fascinating. And this one, ipsissima verba, I quite liked the sound of it, and it means the very word. From worshiping the sun, man grew to worshiping the sun. And so I cannot help but wonder just how far we've really come, since every prophet who has come from the high Empyrean has said the light of the divine is meant to shine in everyone. And so I took a look at dogma, for I always found it sound odd, and discovered that it's backward. Turned around, it spells out am God. Next, I took the Holy Eucharist and saw that with a letter switch, a door appears to paradise because it now spells you a Christ. I also found an atheist bound by no faith cannot exist, for breathe a space twixt A and T, and a theist shows up instantly. Next, I found the word theocracy, where church and state dictate united, and governmental policy is said to be divinely guided, is actually a homonym, which means it has a verbal twin. The alternate theocracy, spelled with an S and not a C, is not in every dictionary, which is itself a commentary. For theocracy means union of the personal soul with God within, around, below, above. So, what need have we for admonitions, taboos, decrees, or prohibitions, when all are guaranteed admission to the promised land by definition?
I love that. I love the subject matter, but specifically that not only did you dive into specific words, the way that we kind of use them today in the, in theology, basically, but also showed that the subtle deviations from what you were saying really did make it so that you have to earn your way into the kingdom somehow. There's something you must do to earn it.
Which is part of it is being obedient to what your king and pope or whomever tell you, or suffer eternal consequences. Though life is short, the eternity is in hell. And that's how you create it, is by giving away your power to other people instead of being yourself to the fullest and recognizing your sacred human majesty and living from that place.
Mm. I was just diving into a little bit more of Bessel van der Kolk's work, The Body Keeps the Score. And it very much so feels that, especially with really pointed words, that when we speak, it really does stick into the tissues of the body. It seems to really hold itself inside the listener. And I know that, being a father, everything I say to my children, I'm really causing myself to be quite a bit more aware as well, that like things that my parents said that I know didn't stand out to them. It was just one of the millions of things they said to me, but they stood out to me. I know that that's happening with my own children. So I know that the things that I'm saying, when my daughter asks questions and I instantly just give an answer, I don't play along with the curiosity. I don't invite her deeper into that curiosity.
Why don't I just stop you for a moment?
Please.
If you would phrase it a little differently. My intention is, on each occasion upcoming, that I will really follow that thread of thought with my daughter and let her lead me into her imagination. Something like that.
Oh, I love that. And I definitely love the fact that even the way that I'm bringing it about, there's this fault that I feel inside myself,
Tell you about faults. I mean, I know I'm interrupting you. I'm not giving you much chance.
I love to be interrupted, Laurel, please.
Well, my faults. Do you hear it sound twin? Say it a few times in your head.
My faults. Faults. I'm not hearing what you're hearing.
Fascinating.
Like fault lines.
F-A-L-S-E.
False.
And
Yeah.
false. And what I realized through the language, that my faults are what is not true about me.
Mm.
They are an expression of my conditioning, my whatever. They are not who I am when I am who I truly am, when I am ect-centric.
Yeah. And it's holding on to some vibration, because I noticed there's this subtle self-diminishing talk that we all do, and it's in a sense it's false humility as well. And it's not coming from really being arrogant but trying to sound humble, but part of it is really like chastising oneself.
I know I've had a really tough one in there. And so I've just started internal family systems work with a therapist, because a crowd, can, and they've quieted and healed, but there's more to do. So I was just thinking last night about what motivates that, the self-recriminations and criticisms. And what I felt in the moment was that we all know who we are as the divine in human form. It's in ourselves, God eternal within the body. How could we not know that? That's the readout. But we're not living at that level. And I think there's discouragement with that. There's also, if you had abusive, deprecating parents, then boy, that stuff is sticky.
Mm.
But I think there's also the desire to be who we truly are fully. And that's what this time is meant to be for us all now, this time of metamorphosis into higher consciousness. And so it can be a rough experience, as it is for a caterpillar, for certain. But the impulse to go from the terrestrial to the celestial must be at least as strong as humans, as it is in caterpillars. So we're going through quite a breakdown sometimes, personally, in our relationships, and namely with ourselves to begin with, but elsewhere, of course. And hold on to that rudder of intention to let this process help you release what you aren't, so that only that which is your true essence can shine.
What I'm feeling in that, maybe this will be a good spot for us to kind of wrap it up in a global transformation Christmas package, is also allowing for, the audience that will hear this. Something that's been coming up for me lately is, one of the reasons why I've noticed that myself, I will sometimes, not all the times, but sometimes intoxicate myself out of a pattern rather than an exploration, or I busy myself, or I caffeinate myself, or I do something to avoid the stillness that would naturally allow for the inner child that wants to reemerge in a moment, or let's say a trauma that happened in a point in time in the past, to reemerge, to be reevaluated, to show that beneath that trauma actually lies a gift, a very beautiful gift. But the pain, and oftentimes it's the pain that keeps us from mining that gift. And it's the even the perceived pain that might come if we, sit in meditation for a while, and then we're like, oh, I can't sit still for that long, or my body hurts, when really it seems like we might be on the verge of something beautiful if we were to just sit and breathe through it and allow for it to naturally emerge. What I'm noticing in myself with what might also be a collective pattern is that we busy ourselves, or we'll add words into silent moments where there might actually something else might happen if we were to not just like shove it full of words because it feels awkward, this silence. I'm curious if you have any thoughts about that can help the audience understand that this metamorphosis that we're talking about, pain is the least of our worries. Like, if we were to understand the beautiful gift that lies on the other side of us really just breathing through these moments of transformation, then it's almost like when my mom was making me eggs when I was younger, and she was getting splattered by a little bit of the oil, and I got splattered walking up to her, and I was like, ow. And she was like, yeah, why don't you stand back? And I was like, well, aren't you getting splattered? And she was like, yes, I am. And I was like, well, why are you doing that then? And she was like, because I love you and I want to feed you. And it dawned on me that she's willing to deal with this pain that caused me to be like, whoa, I don't want to ever have to deal with that again. But that's just a natural consequence of her wanting to feed her loved one.
But what about wearing an apron?
Huh?
Why did you just put on an apron?
Oh, now you're ruining the example.
No,
but you're not. You're forwarding the example.
Yeah. One of my little phrases for myself is oracle of the metaphorical. So I'm really good at making sure what we choose holds up through the whole story, so it can deliver its gift. So, but I get it, yes, except that you also saw, oh my God, my mother is suffering to feed me. Who needs that?
Well, suffering and pain, I would dissociate those two just a little bit. Pain, to me, is something that is just a natural part. It's like a teacher in life. Suffering is more so in the unnecessary continuation of pain, oftentimes attributed by ourselves, wallowing, sometimes by what we would call external forces. But yeah, I mean, obviously the deeper point there was the fact that pain, oftentimes we're running from pain when the pain is inconsequential in the face of the gift of like, let's say, moving through the workout. Like, we want to get to the end of the workout, and at the end of the workout, or the ice bath or whatever, the pain that kept us from doing it is long gone, and the gift is a mountain next to that molehill.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. And I wish we were having this conversation yesterday so you could have reminded me in the midst of the pain that I was not, I took a walk, I went to a yoga class. I did a little, it was an opportunity that I did not take to its full possibility. And many years ago, when my son was a young boy, every month there would be some convergence of pressure on me and the fear that came up. And then, of course, everything came through. And I would then rate myself. Well, how did I go through that one? And I got better at it. But yesterday, I, I managed to function in a good way. But did I sit with that pain and let it inform me? No, I didn't. It's just more than I wanted to handle. And it so neatly fits with an old story I have about what life is like and how much I haven't enjoyed being here. And now here's more insult. and hearing you put it as you did is a reminder for me next time I'm in that swirl to remember I can step outside of the story and see that this is a very potent moment for my healing. And it's not forever. It's just what needs to be brought to my awareness in the moment. So thank you.
Yeah, yeah. It's an ongoing lesson for me as well. I find myself trapped inside the story, following a narrative that in many ways I've already decided is not me, is not my authentic path. And it's brought me to this moment, and I have great gratitude for it. But there's a certain um, commandeering of the ship that I haven't done simply because the patterns are so deeply grooved inside my day to day that it's like it's not even the fear of the unknown, it's the bandwidth. And yeah.
I'm very aware of the part in me that is still addicted to suffering. And that I have seen that time and again, I am the author of my own misery, even if it comes at me from another person.
Mm,
And sometimes I'm open and receptive to learning, and I'm just feel so tuned in with the divine frequency. And other times I'm not there. I'm at a much lower place, and the world looks awful. And it hasn't changed the outer. It still is the same things going on, which are horrible. But I'm not at the place that feels at so much at the effect of it, except as the effect is catalytic for me to do what I know I came here to do.
mm,
So, what I want to share in terms of your conversations with your children, I had a dream, maybe over a decade ago, in which I was listening to a very advanced linguist. And he said, when we tune up the language, the new children coming in won't have to forget who they are or what they came here to do. And William Henry, in his book, The Language of the Birds, identifies English as the language of the bird. So yes, it is a mongrel language on one level, but it is like this great edifice composed of everything
mm.
or so much. And so that's why I said it's a hall of mirrors, it's an echo chamber. It's like tuning up the human instrument in a very ambiguous way. So If English is the language of the birds, then our upgrade of it will have us singing more sweetly. And that sweetness is heart candy. And we feed ourselves with the sweetness and kindness we extend to others. So it's so interwoven. And it's a whole lot of fun. It's just playing with words and becoming the prophet who sees into them in a deeper way, into their sound, turn them inside out and backward, look at how they're spelled. Maybe the spelling is actually an acronym. Like I was looking at soul as S is transformation, O, no beginning or end, U is you and the universe, and the chalice for the divine impulse, and L, I believe, represents God in the alphabet. So it's your universal transformation into your divine expression. That's what the soul carries. There's so many ways to play with words. And I'm about to have a new YouTube with my acronym for the word success, something we all want to be, but it's so poorly defined and mostly associated with wealth and power. So what I see in it is serving universally by contributing creatively to the evolution of the sacred in society. So that will shortly be on my YouTube channel, a new animation of it. So we can all be great successes by being ourselves to the fullest and sharing kindness and love with others. So hopefully the up and running lotto will be up and running soon, and people can participate and develop that muscle of inner listening and divine downloading of the new words and the tuned up old words for the English language. So we sing through our hearts with our words in exchange with each other and nature. And as my poem, Open Heart Synchrony, describes, it's in this book, that when our words so melt the heart, they start the milk of human kindness flowing, so that every time we speak our mind, we set another flower growing. Then I believe before our very eyes, we human beings, like butterflies, will fully metamorphosize. So that's a little segment, a stanza in this longer poem that I wrote before I'd heard of the language of the birds, and then discovered that my vision is part of ancient mythology. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I really do feel that you are a universal agent sent not just into my life, but into many people's lives at this very unique time in history where I feel like the destabilization we're seeing happening to society has a positive to it. The old story that I feel is withering and coming to an end, maybe not withering actually, but coming to its end in the face of a new chapter or story opening up. That this destabilization we're experiencing right now is also the absolute perfect time for us not just to hear how other people are playing with words, but to engage with that game, with that wordplay as well, which I believe is, you're not going to get any more fit by going to the gym and watching other people work out. You may learn a couple things by watching people do their martial arts, but it's not until you actually engage with it and you feel the precious intimacy of allowing your body to express itself upon those things and allowing your mind to tinker with some of these words themselves, that we'll notice that the gift is also within us. So I really have to say thank you to you for being a gift at this point in time for me, not just with what you shared with my kids, which that is very deep and already in my heart, But I hope the audience is hearing this in a way that this is for us to play. This word play is not just like, oh, well, give us the new code, let's download it, and we're all of a sudden operating under it, like in the Matrix, where I want to know Kung Fu, and then bam, all of a sudden you know Kung Fu. You have to tinker with these things. You have to engage with it and play with it. So I just want to say thank you so much for what you've offered us and the audience at this very vital time where people are starting to question narratives. They're starting to question where narratives come from and authority, which holds narratives together at this time. And as we're starting to question these things more, rather in a finger pointing way, more in a wordplay way, where we realize that we can author this new story, and in fact, we must engage with it. This song must be sung by all of us, if you will. So I appreciate that this is a life's work of yours, and that it's just really beautiful to hear that every time a word comes out of my mouth, I can see when you've already gotten through the end of that code or that algorithm, if you will, and you see that word, and it's just like, well, can I share you what I've come up with in that word? And it really causes me to take a look at, okay, Ben, word choice. Why did you use that word? Is it empowering? And just that little tiny moment, it's not just that you gave me a new word, it's that you showed that at every turn, every single word that I'm building this logic and rhetoric, this rhetoric off of, it starts to develop itself a little bit more, not in a self-censoring way, but because it seems like in the way that you are using words, it's not manufactured, it's not pre-digested and pre-written down, and you're not regurgitating, it's not a recital. It really is a brand new language that is emerging with new like vitality in the words, as you show that, like, listen, these words, just where you land them in the sentence makes them more or less musical as well. So that's my long-winded way of saying thank you so much for sharing your life's work with us on this program.
Such a pleasure. Thank you so very much.
Yeah. Gordo, thank you so much for manning the back end as well.
Pleasure, guys. My pleasure.
Yeah.
I debated on whether to have another sentence in there about it. Can I say that sentence now? And then if you like it, you can add it. Because whenever someone is having a moment in front of a camera, other someone's can feel less than. And a beautiful quote from Simon Peter Fuller that says, "For the plan of love and light to work out, every part must be as important as every other." And what I realized, because I'm 77. I've been at this for 74 years, and it almost went out in the world in big ways in the past and then imploded. And boy, that was not easy to endure. But I got the message that if I'm the triangle in the orchestra and I come in a moment too soon or a moment too late, something that could have lifted everything to a higher level is lost but unnoticed. So I think, like, some seeds only sprout after a forest fire or after several bouts of freeze and thaw, freeze and thaw. Everything is divinely timed, including each of us in our personal evolution and in our contributions. So some people look at me sometimes as a celebrity. I am certainly not that. I am so imperfect in my own self-talk at this point, on the way to getting better and better, but just ordinariness going on over here, but ordinariness focused on my greatest pleasure, which has been words.
I love that. And I've thought of this in the past In fact, I believe some of the greatest teachers that I've ever come across are the ones who aren't at some unattainable level speaking down at you, but the ones who are on the path side by side with you, not pretending like it's any different. So I just want to honor you for that, because however we term perfect and perfection, it's, to me, we we can only sing along with those that are along with us on the ride, not at the end of the line, or I think there's something very beautiful about also acknowledging that, like, anybody with a camera on them that may be eloquent, or having thought through many thoughts before and able to call them up on demand, um, those are just tools. But the real essence, the reason to use those tools, to call upon them, is called upon by the moment. And that triangle is called upon in that moment, right? It lifts it up in that moment. And I really appreciate you also calling attention to all the listeners as well, who may even think, well, I'm on the other side. I'm just one of the however many people will watch this. And it's like, that's right. And we take that light, that wisdom, that beauty, and we share it on in our own families. That is no small part of the evolution of consciousness and whatever this transformation is. So I appreciate you for bringing that to light as well. And I also just want to say that everything that you mentioned about the books, like with the website, all that stuff is in the show notes for the audience. So and this is going to be living on our YouTube page, so everyone can get access to your entire body of work and more. And I would really invite everybody to dive into this entire body of work and also start playing along with it. Don't just be the witness of it, but be the witness that intends to play along with this symphony, because there is something happening on planet Earth, whether you can point to articles that verify it or not. I think the most beautiful thing that we can do as the witnesses of other people's beauty is to carry it on in some way, is to share it. So with that being said, Laurel, thank you so much for spending this time with us today. This has been such a pleasure. I'm really glad that it happened on the winter solstice.
Me too. Thank you so very much.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, Laurel Airica. Wow. Please go through the show notes. Look at her large body of work here. I was about to say water, but look through the large body of work there. You will come to notice that there is so much that is calling to you, and just use your intuition as to what's calling to you at what time, and just dive right in. There's so much there, and all of it, you don't need some academic background to be able to pick it up from wherever it is. It will resonate with you, and you will know, okay, this is my entry point in. So utilize that. And Gordon and I, we try to bring you this quality of material every single Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern for you at home, because this is not just so we get to have camera time. This is really to spark the relationship, and also to give just tools that you will know when these tools are being called upon by the universe to pull out and to offer those gifts to others. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, I have such mad respect for you for coming back all the time to check out what content Gordo and I are putting out here for you. And with that being said, I love you all. Have a very Merry Christmas, happy holidays, New Year's, and we will catch you all next time on the Ben Stewart Podcast.